As we asked at the top of the hour, will there be a ceasefire in Gaza? Well, despite pressure from the Biden administration to accept what they call an extremely generous offer from Israel, Hamas is yet to agree. Now, regardless of the ceasefire, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will not stop the coming military action in Rafah. Now, joining me now to discuss this and much more is Senator Pete Ricketts from Nebraska. He serves on 3 Senate committees, including the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Ricketts, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
So I know you, being on the Foreign Affairs Committee, you're tracking what's happening all over the world. The world's on fire under the Biden policies. Let's talk about the ceasefire negotiations. What do we know? What's the latest?
Well, I think what we ought to be seeing from our administration is more support from Israel with regard to this. Hamas is a terrorist organization that started this war, and Israel is absolutely correct when they say that they need to be destroyed. That will not only be in Israel's interest, but in our interest and the interest of civilization in general. And so we need to be supporting them and not trying to cut them short from achieving that goal. Now, if they decide that this is one of the ways they can get some of those hostages back, obviously we want our hostages back. It's one of the things we don't hear from the administration enough, talking about the Americans that Hamas is still holding. Inexplicably, they don't talk about that. We want to get our hostages back, but we also need to make sure that this organization is destroyed, and then we can start working about how can we create a better future for the Gazans rather than having a terrorist organization rule over them.
When we talk about the future, Israel should they not be in the driver's seat here? I mean, they're the ones that have to live there. They're the ones that endured October the 7th. We see the United States, the Biden administration, pushing this 2-state solution as a part of these negotiations. I mean, should that even be a part of this conversation at this point?
Yeah, in my opinion, absolutely not. I mean, this is about destroying a terrorist organization. There's no way that Israel can allow Hamas to continue to exist. Hamas said shortly after October 7th that they would continue these attacks. You know, this is a terrorist organization that killed civilians, brutally raped women, killed little children. I mean, the organizations need to be destroyed and needs to be destroyed as soon as possible. There can be no talk about where we go in the future until this organization is out of the way. And then there'll have to be some sort of discussion about where does Gaza go from here to be able to restore a government that the Israelis can deal with, but it's not Hamas. And so, and it's not clear it's the Palestinian Authority either, because they're also very corrupt. So we've got a long ways to go before we talk about where we go afterwards. What we have to focus on is destroying Hamas now.
Saudi Arabia has been a part of these conversations, negotiations. Could they be a part of the long-term governance of Gaza once Hamas is eliminated?
I do think that there is going to be a role for the nations in the Middle East to participate in this, to be able to be a part of how Gaza is rebuilt in a way that will be peaceful and prosperous for its citizens and not be a threat to Israel. Again, I think those conversations can go on behind the scenes right now, but until Hamas is destroyed, it's a moot point, right? Until Hamas is gone, there is not going to be any peace in Gaza.
One other question on this front is that the International Criminal Court has raised the possibility of pursuing Israeli officials for war crimes, for defending their country. I think you've been a part of a group in the Senate speaking into this. What's the latest on this?
Well, what this really demonstrates is the hypocrisy of these international organizations like the ICC. You know, we've had atrocity committed since October 7th, and what they've said is, well, they're looking into Hamas as well. Well, why are you waiting so long to look at Hamas? We have the video evidence from Hamas's own cameras demonstrating the atrocities that they did. So why isn't the ICC working on that first, since we actually have all this stuff? It also would be important to note that we're actually not a member of the ICC, and neither is Israel. And these international organizations are terribly anti-Semitic. This is just, again, one of the ways that the world is trying to attack our ally Israel, and we should do everything we can to block this. Again, it's just hypocrisy at its height that they're talking about holding an ally of ours like Israel accountable, but not even doing anything about Hamas at this point when we know we've got the evidence for Hamas. So again, this is something we need to continue to resist. These international organizations are incredibly biased. And it's one of the reasons, well, for example, why we're not a part of this.
Well, in and of itself, it's not significant, but it's yet another talking point for the left. It's something that they can use at the United Nations. And it's another reason why we just don't need to be a part of any of these entities that have repeatedly shown their anti-Semitic holdings and, of course, their hostility toward Israel as a state.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, we need to encourage the Biden administration to do the right thing. I was pleased to see that they've continued to start vetoing some of the bad ideas that have been put in front of the United Nations. But, we skipped a vote on one of those that was against Israel. We should not do that. We should say we are with Israel 100% until this terrorist organization called Hamas is destroyed.
Senator Ricketts, you're a former governor, state of Nebraska. What do you have to say about what's happening on these college campuses across the country?
Well, of course, everybody's got their free speech rights, and we want them to have that. But it also means, in our country, you can exercise your rights, but you can't infringe upon anybody else's rights. And so to the students who are actually infringing upon other students' rights, these universities need to take a hard stance. I think that if it's not too much to say, hey, if you're going to continue to break our rules and infringe upon other students who are trying to get their studies done, you're going to be expelled. And if you're going to break the law, we're going to call the police in. I mean, this is what it needs to happen. I think if you look at places like in Florida, where you have a strong governor who's issuing that statement, you don't see the kind of problems you're seeing in some of these kind of what we call elite Ivy League colleges that are, very liberal. In fact, I was watching some of the news reports saying that in part of the problem is actually the faculty who has indoctrinated these students and is actually encouraging this sort of behavior. Really, we need to remember we can express our freedom of speech, but you cannot interfere with other people's rights.
Agree, 100%. You should have the freedom of speech. We all defend that, or we should defend it, but there's a line that crosses. Are you concerned? I know you've been very vocal on your concerns over China. Is there any effort or any evidence, I should say, that foreign actors such as China are funding and fueling some of this unrest on college campuses here in the United States?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. TikTok. If you look at TikTok, despite the fact that if you poll Americans, they broadly support Israel and not Hamas. But if you look on TikTok and look at the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian content versus the pro-Israel content, the pro-Israel content is outnumbered by the pro-Hamas Palestinian content 50-1. 50-1. If we were going to expect to see it be a normalized curve of, American support, you'd see that it would actually favor Israel by a wide margin. This is just one of the ways that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to sow dissent in influence, exercise their malign influence on our society. And it's one of the reasons why I voted for the supplemental package that included the requirement that TikTok be sold to an American buyer so we can end this malign Chinese influence on our society. They're laughing all the way, to the bank when they're talking about like what we allow them to do in our country, and They allow none of it in their country.
Senator, we're up against a break. If you could stick with us, I want to come back and I want to actually talk about that bill that would require the sale of TikTok and China's response to that, as well as the military aid that was given to Taiwan. China's not too happy. Now, before the break, we discussed the response to the legislation regarding TikTok. China not very happy about that, but they also threatening retaliation because of the foreign aid that went to Taiwan. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Zhan said yesterday, quote, if the United States clings obstinately to its course, China will take resolute and forceful steps to firmly defend its own security and development interest, end quote. Is this, how do you take this? Is this a threat?
Well, we've got to remember that the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China is our chief adversary in the world and an existential threat to this country. Xi Jinping has been very clear. He wants to replace us and create a Chinese world order where he sets the rules about what's going to go on. He's also been very clear that he wants Taiwan part of China again. So we would expect that they are going to have very strong language when we show that we're going to support Taiwan. Now, this government's position is that if Taiwan reunites with the People's Republic of China peacefully, that's one thing, but we absolutely oppose any use of force. So what we're doing is helping Taiwan to be able to create some of the asymmetric defenses they need to deter China from trying to take that island by force. This is frankly in the entire world's interest, because if China were to try to take Taiwan by force, it would lead to a major power war and, of course, have huge impacts because 30% of the world's trade goes through that strait right there. And I've seen some estimates that I think are probably conservative, that world GDP would drop by 10% in just the first year of that war. So it's in our interest, it's in Taiwan's interest to deter that war, it's in the world's interest. And it's the only person it's not in the interest of is China. And that's why they're making all this noise. What we need to do is continue to stand strong on our path. Our policies are very clear, and we need to continue to support Taiwan to be able to deter China from trying to take this by force. And that's part of what this package was about.
China's been playing the long game to overtake the United States economically and militarily. America is, under this administration, the policy of this administration, lacking that focus. Where does China stand in their efforts to usurp America on the global stage?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we certainly have people in the administration who understand the threat that's coming from China. Unfortunately, I think if you look at the White House, this is not one of the things that they have made a big priority, right? So when China sends a spy balloon over our country, we see a very ineffectual response from the White House towards this. They have kept the trade, tariffs in place that the Trump administration put in place, but they haven't really taken any steps to go beyond that. They have done some good things with regard to, our allies with Japan and South Korea and establishing a strong relationship with India, which is all good. But frankly, a lot of that was low-hanging fruit because China's actions have been so bad, they've really driven these allies into a stronger relationship with us and the other folks in the neighborhood. We need to see an administration that's very going to clearly lay down the markers with regard to what our policy is, how we're going to support Taiwan, and let Xi Jinping know that should he step over the line, we will be there very forcefully to push back against it.
Some of our other policies obviously are eclipsing the concern about China. One of the policies is the Biden administration pushing burdensome emission mandates. They want to require up to 2/3 of new vehicles to be electric in just 8 years. Of course, that is going to make us more reliant upon China in what they produce, in particular in the batteries. You've been very critical of this coming mandate.
Yeah, absolutely. The Biden administration has just produced new rules that require 2/3 of all vehicles sold in the year 2032 to be electric vehicles. And to your point about making us dependent on China, China processes between 60 and 80% of a lot of the rare earth elements and critical minerals we need to make batteries. Things like graphite or cobalt or manganese or lithium or whatever you want. And Tony, you may remember a time when we were actually dependent on the Middle East for oil. I certainly do as, being a small kid and what that meant to us and how it handicapped us and hurt us economically. Why on earth would we want to make ourselves dependent on our chief adversary in the world? This is just part of how crazy stupid this administration is. And at the same time they're mandating EVs, they're also attacking American energy, right? They've canceled leases. They've just put out a new clean power plan, which is going to shut down our coal plants, our clean coal plants, and our natural gas. Where do they expect this electricity to come from? I mean, this administration does not think, it doesn't plan, it just goes after whatever the extreme radical environmentalists want to do, and it's actually undermining our ability to keep the world safe and our country safe.
Well, it certainly helps our adversaries, but it hurts the American family. It's the working families that are going to have to, who's going to be able to saddle up for these expensive electric cars and higher energy costs as a result of eliminating these power plants?
Yeah, you're exactly right. First of all of our American families are facing Biden inflation right now with his terrible policies and reckless spending. But just think about this. An average EV costs $53,000. A low-income family will spend on average $12,000 for a regular car. If you mandate all these electric vehicles, you're going to drive up the cost of regular cars, these used cars that use, gasoline,
Right.
and make it unaffordable for our low-income families. And that's the pathway out of poverty. You're also in states like mine in Nebraska, EVs don't really work well in rural areas. So you're going to tell rural folks they can't get to their jobs? I mean, this is just a horrible, horrible policy that is going to make it more expensive for our families in this country to be able to get by.
It's so short-sighted, and they don't consider the unintended consequences of pursuing these types of policies. Senator Pete Ricketts, thanks so much for taking time to join us today. Always good to talk with you.